I'd like to talk a little bit about Vernier, if I may. The tyranny of distance and 2 world wars forced Australia to develop as a manufacturing nation. In 1960, manufacturing contributed 25% of GDP, but today it has declined to 10% or less than 10%. It's $100 billion and manufacturing employs over 950,000 people. An AIG study in 2012 showed that Australia's labour cost has increased so that it is now more expensive than USA. The report concludes that manufacturing in USA will emerge leaner and stronger than ourselves. We see the Vernier Society as representative of traditional Australian manufacturing. We were formed in 1942 to manage strategic materials and manufacturing processes to aid the war effort. A society of engineers and manufacturing people who meet once a month to share ideas and friendship. Vernier is adapting to remain relevant. Our new interactive website and a variety of membership opportunities, combined with a more focused speaker program, is attracting very busy people. Vernier last year obtained a grant from the Victorian government to audit companies to identify opportunities where they could improve performance, productivity, innovation and sales. We studied 24 companies and we got somewhat surprising results. They operate in clear niche markets. They're very cost conscious and have limited resources for improvement projects. They hardly use government grants. They see benefits but find the process too slow and cumbersome. Some infant companies could benefit from funding assistance but are too small to receive them. Most companies are averse to collaboration, believing it could lead to exploitation. All see the changing face of manufacturing in Australia and recognise the need to adapt and grow or to decline. For Vernier, the next task is to capitalise on the insight that gained from the audit. We identified many small, innovative features in every company. These clever concepts can be picked up and used by other companies if we can engender a will to help each other. We see our task now is to manage the sharing of these insights. In 1942, we were charged with managing strategic processes, and now we seek to manage strategic thinking, leading to prosperity by sharing ideas and experience. The end of automotive manufacturing may be a wake-up call that the manufacturing industry in Australia needed. It's time to discard the nostalgia of the past and look for new opportunities in the global markets of the 21st century. Today, Professor Roos will help us to understand how Australians could create the building blocks for this opportunity. Professor Roos is chair of the South Australian Advanced Manufacturing Council and a member of the South Australian Economic Development Board. He's a member of the Flinders University Council, the International Advisory Group for Design Gov, the Australian Centre for Excellence in Public Sector Design, and the CSIRO's Manufacturing Sector Advisory Council. In 2013, he was also a member of the Prime Minister's Manufacturing Task Force. Göran currently holds at least 9 positions in educational think tanks throughout the world. He is presently the Director of Innovation Performance Australia. He has worked as a consultant in more than 50 countries and has served in management positions in several European and US-based corporations. Göran is one of the founders of Modern Intellectual Capital Science, a recognised world expert in this field and a major contributor to the thinking practice in the areas of strategy and innovation management, as well as innovation policy. Göran was named one of the 13 most influential thinkers for the 21st century by a Spanish business journal, Dirección y Progreso, and in 2011 was appointed Thinker in Residence on Manufacturing by the South Australian Premier. Please welcome Göran Roos.
Thank you very much. I do apologize for my dress code. I arrived in from Singapore this morning and have been in continuous meetings since then. So, what I thought I'd do is to give a little overview of things. I thought I'd talk a little bit about some of the key trends that are happening out there, because the good news, and of course the bad news as well, is that manufacturing is continuously changing, and at the moment it's changing faster than it has ever done before, and that has some interesting consequences. I will talk a little bit about some of the challenges that, let's call it, the traditional Australian manufacturing businesses face, and a little bit of what we might do on that in this area, and some small generic pieces of advice about what we know of firms that tend to do well in these type of environments. So that's generally what I intend to cover. There is a structural shift, and it's not only in Australia, it is generally. And that structural shift is generally around a set of forces that drive them. And there tend to be generally four forces, and I'll cover three of those. There are forces that want the value chains to be distributed across the world, creating global value chains. Then there are forces who want to concentrate value chains into one position and make them smaller. Then there are technology shifts, and then there are shifts around demand and preferences among consumers. The latter one I will not touch so much upon, but that is a fourth force that is changing these things. Then, of course, there is an issue around Australia unique, which is what's happened, that Australia has moved, as we heard, from before 2008 being basically a low-cost operating environment to around 2008 rapidly expanding up to a high-cost operating environment. And as a consequence of that, certain things happened, and one of them is the collapse of scale-intensive value chains that operate in highly competitive global markets. An example of that is, of course, automotive. So we'll talk a little bit around the consequences and impacts of that. And actually, I am less worried about what people are worried about in the newspaper than about other things as a consequence that nobody seems to talk about, but we'll come to that when we get there. I have some easily absorbed slides. And that's primarily because you can have them afterwards and you can think about them yourself. So I tend to write them as an issue. I don't necessarily talk about it. So the first I wanted to do was to talk a little bit around what has happened structurally from history until tomorrow. So, and I will do it very generically, so bear with me. So the first thing that happened was that at some time, quite a long time ago, we started to reduce trade barriers. And that meant that I, as a manufacturer, could find a market somewhere else where maybe I could even get more paid for my product. At the same time, people in those markets suddenly had more choice. So they now could get more value because they could buy things on more characteristics than maybe just price. They could have more colors or more shapes or whatever in this area. So everybody had a win-win from that. And of course that means that I as a manufacturer suddenly sold more, which means I laid the ground for scale. This is when the large firms started to appear. If you go back in history, this is where the big boys started to come around, which are now very large multinationals, been around for a long time. They came through that scale. What then happened, of course, is by being out there, they noticed that in some places, labor was cheaper than in other places. So they say, I can locate my activity there and get a cost benefit. And that is, of course, where we started to get these things around offshoring. So I moved my factory to a place with a lower cost, in this area. The next thing that happened was that information and communication technologies, so IT or ICT, depending on how you phrase it, started to develop. That means that I was now able to manage a higher level of complexity than I could before. That meant that I could split up my own activities and my value chains in smaller parts and do this kind of location issue. So I have a little bit of my chain there, a little bit of my chain there, a little bit of my chain here, to really maximally benefit from these things. So I had production over there, administration here, R&D here, supplier of this type there, supplier of that type there, outsourcing these things here and outsourcing those things here. So I got what we now have, which is very complex global supply chains. And that is in the world where we are today. What's happening tomorrow is that we are seeing a strengthening of the forces that drive us towards concentrating the supply chain. We see that we are getting, in essence, we want to co-locate our activities stronger where the knowledge development happens if we are operating in businesses with rapid knowledge development. So if I operate in biotechnology, in pharmaceutical and so on with rapid knowledge development, I need to be in places where that knowledge happens. So if you look at R&D in pharmaceutical, it's only basically in 3 places in the world. You know? It's Cambridge and it's Gothenburg and it's in the US and so on. That's it. You don't put it anywhere else because really you need access to that leading edge knowledge. So you get concentration like that. Then you get an issue around demand. You need to be where the market is. So 2/3 of all manufactured activities, all manufactured goods, are manufactured in the market that is the largest for that goods. So GM is in China, not primarily because it's cheap, because it isn't. It is in China because it is the biggest market. Okay? So it is that type of a scenario. You go to where the market is. And that, of course, tends to concentrate things as well in that area. Now, 1/3 is not where the market is. The 1/3 is where the source of the knowledge is. So these are the forces that now tends to take power over the disseminating forces before that spread things out. Then we have, of course, the issue about trying to chase low-cost wage. That is a really difficult task. Very few companies do that successfully. And I'm going to illustrate that for you. Those companies that are really, really good at chasing low cost in manufacturing, they left China around the year 2000. Okay? And then they went to Vietnam, and they are now leaving Vietnam. Okay? So if you go to China now, because you think it's low cost, you've just missed it completely. Okay? You are so far behind the ball, you don't even know where the ball is. Okay? It's one of those things. And there are very few companies that know how to do this and do it continuously, right? One of those companies you want to keep an eye on in that sense is a company like IKEA. Okay? IKEA is a low-cost driven operator. They constantly move their manufacturing activities to where the lowest cost is. And of course, if you have 60,000 people in Vietnam operating for you and you're going to get out of there and you turn up at the doorstep of another country, I don't know, let's take a random example like Bangladesh, and you say, all right, I'm thinking about locating 60,000 jobs here, Mr. Government. Would you like to enter a discussion with me? The answer is generally yes, okay, in this sense. So they get some power very early on in those countries' development that allow them to shape the environment to further their cost advantage that they get by moving there. But they will leave. When the costs go up, they will leave. The average manufacturing labor cost in East Coast China will around the beginning of next year be the same as US. Okay? Just to put it in perspective. It's increasing very rapidly, and that is now, within 12 months, it will be US, and then it will go above. Okay? So you don't go to China for low cost. That's not why you go there. You go there because it's a market and because they will become very good at doing R&D for you. That's the phase that's happening next. The other one is that you locate your area to the most conducive business environment, the environment which is transparent, predictable, and stable. Does that characterize Australia? So how predictable are your operating environment here? Very socially, very nicely, very nice socially too. Well, I mean, how about taxation levels? Predictable. So what will happen to the green taxes? Will they go? Will they stay? Do we know? No. What happens to the requirements from unions on costs around the maritime activities? Will they agree? Will they not agree? Is it predictable how much they will get, will not get, will ask for next year? The answer is it's somewhat predictable, but it's by far from the most predictable environment. And if you look at those type of lack of transparency, predictability, and stability, that is what drives things like sovereign risk in a country. And Australia is not is far from the lowest sovereign risk. It's actually much higher than people think because of this lack of stability. And if you're going to make an investment in manufacturing which has a 10 to 20 year horizon on stability issues, if you don't know that, you ain't going to make it here. You're going to make it somewhere where you understand that the environment is predictable. Had a gentleman here from Germany the other week who spoke around German industrial policy, and it was wonderful. He had the industrial policy timeline here, where it's done, what it is, and then he had government changes, bang, 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 bang. No change on this. Total bipartisan, total commitment, that's what we go. That is stability. That is partly why they do well. Because you can make a 20-year commitment there, and you know that the boundary conditions you have now will still be valid with the highest probability. So those things are important. You need to increase the co-location of production and development. And that means that I am actually, from a personal point of view, I don't believe for a second that you're going to be able to retain design centers for automotive vehicle if production leaves. Because the moment you separate production from development, you incur a 15% cost disadvantage on average. Because you miss out the design for manufacturability and all those type of issues that you get by co-locating these things. So I think we will see a steady diminishing of that until it is gone. That's my personal view. Okay. You need to sometimes increase your co-location with lead or key customers. So the customers that really are the ones that helps you drive your development and are to some extent early developers of your early absorbers and users of your products. So, and that means that you need to have really, really good sizable lead customers that you work with. How many of those do we have in Australia? A handful. Okay. We have 2 mining companies that are very large, but they show very little interest in being lead customers. They are followers rather than leaders. Okay. We have a public sector which on the whole in many countries is a dominating lead customer. It is in the US, for example. Here it is not. And by the way, there is a classical industry policy that works every time and it's perfect and it kills off your own industry. It's perfect, okay? The way you do that is in a domain where you have one dominating customers, you say that you buy off-the-shelf proven solutions. Because in that point you can't innovate. The guy who can innovate comes from somewhere else, where they can innovate and prove things and bring them here, and by definition that will kill off your local industry. It works every time. It's a really good industry policy if that's your objective, right, in that scenario. So we need to have those issues. You have healthcare, you have all this kind of stuff where you have potential lead customers if they choose to act as such. You need to locate where the required skill is available. So skill is the skill that you need in modern manufacturing. That means you need people that have high levels of ICT. I mean, you go back 20 years, capital equipment was put in place to support the people who worked in the factory. Today, the people are there to support the capital equipment. And that requires different skill levels. Primarily, it requires a lot of ICT. Then you work in quite complex system, not only value chain, you work in ecosystem. And you work in many skills. That means you have to have team building and team operating skills. You have to have relationship building skills. You have to have a lot of soft skills in these areas. So when you look at out there, you want people with STEM, primarily added ICT, and you want them to have really good soft skills. Those are the guys we're talking on the floor. Right? That's where you want to go. So if we are suffering from lack of STEM and lack of those skills, I ain't going to come here. I'm going to go somewhere else where I can find those mixed skills. And that means that the industry has to take responsibility to develop these things, which of course what you do if you have countries where you have a really good functioning apprenticeship system, which includes the soft skill development in this area, not only being a good fitter and turner in these things. And you want to locate to regions with high economic complexity. And that's a word. each industry requires a lot of suppliers and things. So, you need somebody that can know how to bend the plastic, somebody who can put together the electronics, somebody to do the metal, somebody who is good at the lawyer issue in this area, somebody who understands the infrastructure needs for these type of companies. All those things that are required as a capability in order to underpin an industry we tend to call industrial commons. And a collective noun for all of those things, when we put them together as many industrial commons underpinning different domains, is economic complexity. Right? So, if I have a country with high economic complexity, or put it, the scale goes from don't ask me why, but it goes from 2.5 to -1. In 2.5 country, which is theoretical level, you have present all industries known to mankind. Okay, they're all there. If you have -1, you have nothing. You have a guy with a wooden stick walking across a desert. Okay, that's the kind of level we have. The highest real country sit around 2. Okay, they would be countries like Japan, Germany, Switzerland, Sweden. They sit around 2. Next level down, you have places like US and Singapore, Korea. They're about 1.4, 1.5, 1.6. That type of a level. Australia is at -0.3. And why is this important? It is because if I have a random economic event, in other words, I have a guy with an idea who is going to start a company. No? In order for him to be able to do that, he needs to find a guy who can do the plastic bit, the guy who can do the metal bit, the guy who can do all those kind of stuff. And if those things are present, he will start his company there because that's where he lives, that's where he's socially embedded. But if those things are not there, he has to go to where they are. And that means he will turn up in Singapore or in California or wherever, where the economic complexity is high. So it's fundamentally important to have high economic complexity in a nation in order to be able to benefit from the creation of new companies and new industries. And here is my worrying point about losing automotive. Because automotive is one of those industries with an extremely high surrounding industrial commons with lots of complexity. And when we lose this one, we will lose that complexity. So it is the reduction in complexity as a consequence of losing the automotive that really worries me. Not the fact that we happen to lose a lot of people, or that we happen to lose a lot of money, or that a few companies, quite a lot of them, will go under. That is bad in its own right, but that really isn't what worries me. What worries me is that we're losing the complexity. And that means that we are no longer going to be able to capture the opportunities presented to us on the level that we previously could. That is what worries me about the automotive side. And by the way, automotive in Australia invests about 10-point-something% in R&D. The average Australian company is 4%. So that means that if you lose this big chunk, R&D spending will really drive down, which has implications in this scenario. And the economic complexity on my calculations would drop from roughly -0.3 to -0.4. Okay, as a consequence of this. No, not quite. But you can do a weighting exercise of how you look at the relative supply chains, its size and implications of that. And just to give you a number, there are 719 companies directly in the automotive supply chain as primary participants just in South Australia. 119 just in South Australia. Because you have to go all the way down, it works all the way down. It's not the 33 on the top, it's all the ones underneath. So, the next bit is technology. And technology is constantly changing, and it is changing. And the type of technologies that have highest impact belong to a group that we call key enabling technologies. They have 2 characteristics. The first one is that they impact all businesses and other technologies. And the second one is that they form industries in their own right. A classic example is ICT. ICT is part of everything else, and it underpins all businesses, and it is also an industry in its own right. Those activities that we look on there that we see are things like nanotechnology, advanced materials, micro and nanoelectronics, photonics, industrial biotechnology, and what we call advanced manufacturing technologies that include things like robotics and additive manufacturing or in daily parlance 3D printing. They fall under there as examples. There are more things in advanced manufacturing systems. So what is important for both countries and companies is to master these technologies, to understand what are they, what can they do for me, and how can I put them to use. And as a national level is to build these ecosystems that have the capability to support those things. And we have a reasonable academic mastery of these things. We are really good in Australia in the academic sphere of understanding these things. We are not equally good in the industrial sphere. For example, 3D printing is old. It's been around for close to 20 years, right? It's just, lately that's going to grab the attention of the general public because performance have gone up and costs have gone down and a few other type of things. So in many other countries, there is already industries built in this domain and they are already in activity level. In Australia, we're still on the level where this floats around mostly in the academic world. There are very few companies that set up themselves to understand these things, to work with them. And the reason is frequently that there is an erroneous cost-based view on this. And let me give you an example. And there are many shortcomings of the technology, so you just accept that. But in principle, here is the scenario. If I'm going to buy a piece of metal in some shape or other, which is about, yay big, it will cost me, if I go to a normal production and CNC, $500, give or take, okay, if I buy a few of them. That's roughly what I'm going to pay for it. If I do it in 3D printing, it will cost me around about $10,000 to get the same thing. So the conclusion that companies here can draw is say, oh, that's useless. That has no implication for me, right? But of course, that's wrong. The question more becomes, where is the value added that I can get through this area higher than the differential in price? So what you can do in 3D printing is to create things that you can't do normally, different shapes, different structures. So I was in a factory in another country that makes plastics. It produces plastics. And of course in plastic you need tools. The bit of metal, as you all know, that sits in contact and does shapes and things with it. They used to buy these things from tool makers. They then discovered they can actually create through 3D printers tools which have a higher heat dissipation. In other words, the plastic cools faster. Because of how they do these things, which you can't do with CNC machines because of the way you structure the material in layers and the way you shape it. And that meant in this large factory, which is a big one, that the payback time on the difference between $500 and $10,000 was 26 minutes. Okay. So they now had a whole room with these things where they did their own tool development and their own issues like that. So I asked them, so, okay, you used to have tool makers supply you? Yeah. Can I have the name of some of those? Yeah, that's fine. So I got a few names of their ex-suppliers. And I went out and visited these people. And I said, oh, you're a tool maker. Tell me about your business. Oh, all right, okay. Oh, you have big customers. Yeah, okay. Did you used to have this company as a customer? Yeah. You have them as a customer now? No. Why did you lose them? Oh, we were probably too expensive. It tells me they have no idea what's going on. They haven't got a clue. Right? And it means they are dead. They just don't know it yet. Right? And this is the issue. It's about looking at where these things come first. And if you then want to see where the early activities are, apart from these kind of hidden activities in business-to-business, look for where vanity is important. Human vanity has no price limits. Okay? So for human vanity, you're willing to buy things and pay a very high price. And that is where you find new technologies most frequently put in place in a sustainable business model. So let me give you some examples. Where is the only sustainable today business model based on genetic cloning? You know Dolly the sheep, right? 2 Dolly the sheep. Say again? Pet cats. You are absolutely right, although with one step further. It is pet dogs, all right? And it's in Korea. It's Americans whose dog has died, and they want to get it back, so they go over to Korea with a sample, and then they generate the new dog, which is the original dog. The problem is that the Americans who come there do not understand the distinction between genotype and phenotype. So what they get is the genotype, but it is not trained. Big disappointment. So you have to start again with this one. But that is, the one sustainable, very profitable business model that we today have for cloning. Okay? And it's about human vanity. Right? 3D printing is the same. The primary issue is about you customizing your glasses, getting your shoes customized, in fashion shoes and all this kind of stuff. That's where it is. And that's very profitable. But it's about human vanity. But what that allows us to do is to understand as a producer of this type of equipment what it takes and modify issues and live with faults that the business wouldn't accept and get your way around it. And there are many problems around 3D printing. You print layers of metal, you don't understand exactly yet the fusing issues, so they will tend to warp geometrically if you're not careful with how you do it. So there are all kinds of problems, but for many applications, they still can do things that you can't do with other areas, and that is worth it. GE prints nozzles for their jet engines. The tens of thousands of them are 3D printed. Because, yes, it's expensive, but it doesn't matter. Because they make them better as a consequence of this, which you can't do in other ways. So these are just examples. How many of you have a robot on your factory floor? Okay, some of one. How many of you have a robot at home? I have one. It mows my lawn. Okay? It's a little round thing, and it has a little hut. Okay? And it goes out and it mows the lawns, and if it rains, it goes home. And if it's tired, it goes home and rests and comes out again, and it takes Sundays off and all this kind of stuff. But the good news is that it does that in my house in England. And if there is ever a problem, it communicates with me on my phone. And I can tell the neighbor, look, it's stuck over there over a branch. Can you go and lift the big branch off that's blown down overnight? Right? And every time I come home, the lawn is perfectly mowed. Right? And the machine costed, when I bought it some years ago, about £1,400. Okay? It's a perfect robot. And that is very simple robotic technology, but it is a robot. And you will see them all over the place in this sense. So all of these technologies will be there. And the key issue, you need to have enough knowledge about what goes on here to understand whether it will have an impact on you now or later. Okay? Or to quote a very, very intelligent head of a very, very high internationally ranked non-Australian technical university who said there are only two types of research. There is applied research or not yet applied research. Okay? There is no such thing as basic research. There is only applied or not yet applied, okay, in this area. So what you have to think about is, will these technologies enable you to do things that are valuable to you now or later? Because they will all impact you. And if you don't believe that, you're going to go the way of the printing companies in the early 1990s who said the digital printing will have no impact on them. No? Or Kodak, who went bankrupt not so long ago. No? But it means you need to understand the language. You need to understand, for example, why it's industrial biotechnology there and why the key term in that is microbial consortia engineering, for example. And also need to understand why Victoria has wasted close to $1 billion on biotechnology that has generated very little except academic articles. Right? And the reason is there is no guidance for how you put these things to use. So you've handed out a lot of money to researchers and said to them, do what you want. Okay? And they will do what is sexy, right? In their mind. So let me do a politically incorrect statement and give you the following scenario. You have two handsomely looking researchers standing at a bar, surrounded by good-looking women. And the women ask them, what do you do? And the first one says, I am working on curing cancer for mankind. And the second one says, I'm turning pig shit into energy. Okay? Now, here comes two questions, and they have different answers. Who gets the girl and who gets the money? Okay. So the issue here is that you have allowed these people to go and work on things that has very long cycle time, 14 years minimum, to go in the medical scenario, instead of doing industrial applications which have maybe 4 to 5 year cycle time, instantaneous application in this area. And these people, and then you've done them in an area in pharmaceutical and other areas where you have no industrial commons. There is no big player here. There is no demanding customers who is an early adopter, generally speaking, with very few exceptions. So what you have instead is this guy very proudly setting up what they call a company, and then being bought out by these very clever big pharmaceutical companies who swoop here and who pick it up, and by the way, move it to where they have the rest of their R&D, which is in Cambridge or somewhere. And these people come and say, we have sold my company for the odd million, I'm very happy. They haven't sold the company. They sold a taxpayer-subsidized research project with an ABN number. Okay? And hence, the Australian taxpayer has subsidized the R&D pipeline of the big pharmaceutical company. You want to do that? That's fine. But don't expect a return. Right? That's the kind of issue. So you need to have clarity on how to turn these things into what is industrially and value-creating activities. The next domain you need to understand as companies is what's happening on production systems. Frequently forgotten. Production systems, that is a mixture of processes, systems, and technology embodied capital equipment that you put together. And these systems are there to make sure that you get the optimal use out of what you have, and that you produce what you need to produce at the highest value at the lowest cost. And there are huge development in these areas that we need to understand, because the production system is in a low-cost environment is completely different to production systems in a high-cost environment. So these are the systems that we work with in a high-cost environment. And by the way, the German industrial policy, one part of it in today's world, has as a clear objective to dominate the necessary pieces of these four things, so that Germany can retain its complete dominance on advanced manufacturing in the world. That was underpins part of their industry policy, right, to do that. And by the way, to put some numbers on this, China's trade surplus last year, 2013, was $270 billion, give or take. The trade surplus of the Germanic part of Europe, so Holland, Switzerland, Germany, Austria, and Scandinavia, was $550 billion. Twice China. Europe don't have a problem. Parts of Europe has an enormous problem. Very important. UK has still got a trade deficit. Right? And so does US. Okay. And to just put another set of numbers on them, Switzerland is a country with 8 million inhabitants, give or take, with a very high cost base, that has a larger manufactured goods export than India, and has a larger trade surplus with China than Australia has. And it is not primarily built on chocolate. Okay? Mm-hmm. What has happened in Australia then to put you in the position you have? Yes, there is a dollar issue, I accept that, but let's park that. There is actually more important issues, and that is the productivity issue. Australia has had incredibly low productivity growth. Right? What I have here is a set of numbers. They happen to be up until 2011 or so, but it really doesn't matter. It's the same trend goes on anyway. So here is the average annual productivity improvement, labor productivity improvement in these countries over that 10-year stretch. Okay, so it's an average, right? So you can look at US 5%, the Germanic Europe about 4.5%, Korea 6%, Singapore 3%, Australia 2%. Okay, doesn't sound like a big difference, does it, on a yearly basis? You do that every 10 years, and you work out what the difference is. Right, and then you look at what has happened to the unit labor cost. Down, 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 up. So you're awarding yourself a higher salary increase, plus all the costs, than you have productivity increase. Now what's the consequence of that? It's bankruptcy. on a national level. You can't afford to pay for these things. You're awarding yourself more than you can afford to pay for. Right? That's what's happening in Australia. And you will see this because at the moment, and this will be made even worse because the deindustrialization of Australia, in other words, the shrinking of the industry activities where most value creation are happening, means the taxation base is disappearing, and you get what's called empty GDP growth, which is why you have to be very careful with GDP numbers. I have a really good recipe who dramatically increased GDP in Australia like that, and that is that we all sue each other. Okay? And we spend a year in court, everybody, and at the end of the day, half of us pay the other half some money. Okay? At the end of the day, GDP will have gone up fairly dramatically, but no new value will have been created. So GDP is a meaningless number. What you want to look at is kind of gross value added that you have done in the country. And what's happened is that Australia has had empty GDP growth for about 4 years now, which is why the taxation base has collapsed, which is why governments can't raise neither federally or state-wise any revenue. And that means that your costs are going this way and your revenues are going this way, and you will start to see this on growing deficits on state and federal level. And there are only two solutions to that at some point. Either you reduce your costs, that means your living standard. You have to start to charge more for things that were less charged for before. You will reduce the reinvestment in things and all the things. So your living standard will go down. Or you have a long-term issue of raising the ability to create value. The problem is the first one takes 6 months, the second one takes 10 years. And that requires a continuous, stable political policy to get to it, not one that changes every third year. So not only are you expensive, you have very poor productivity. And this change has left 4 types of firms. The first one are those who were set up on a premise of continuously low operating cost, low operating environment, okay, cost-wise. And they, of course, have no chance in this world. One of those examples would be the aluminium smelter out of Geelong. You can load the bauxite ore onto the ship, you can send it to Iceland, you can melt it into aluminium, you can send it back and you can offload it at a cost plus profit that is lower than the cost they're able to even produce it at with subsidized energy out in Geelong. So they have no chance. They are dead. So of course they will keel over. It's obvious. And the reason is that they were assumption that cost would always be low. They are not any longer, hence they cannot survive. That's life. Not their fault. It's just the way the world develops. The next issue is those firms who are normally capital intensive, who were set up to be competitive in any environment. But what they did then was they did something really stupid. They used the depreciation money as dividend rather than as reinvestment in keeping the equipment up to date. So when the cost rose, they were living on rust. Right? Which means there is now 2 choices. This is what's known as a moral hazard problem for government. So either government goes in and helps them and hence reward them for having done the wrong thing, but keep the town in which they sit alive, or government goes and says keel over, in which case they deserve that, but then the town keels over with it. It's one of those wicked problem scenarios. And you can look at that, think of a smelter of your choice, okay? So, they've done that, okay? Then we have the very large pile of companies. They could do very well. The problem is they don't know what good looks like in this new world. So they keep doing what they used to do. And unfortunately, that doesn't work in this world. You need to do new things. And I want to tell you a little bit what that looks like. And then, of course, you have those that are already doing well. And if I look at the manufacturing world, there is round about 35,000 here. There is round about 2,500 here. So about 7% that are down there. They are excellent. They do very well indeed. But they work in a different way. And they live in a space which is characterized by 4 things. High value adding, high variability, high complexity and profitable at low volumes. That's the sweet spot where they sit. And they do that very, very well. Doesn't mean they have low volumes, but it means they are profitable already at low volumes in that domain. And of course, I spoke about this, and you saw that my worry is this whole issue around losing the economic complexity. So success then is different. In a low-cost environment, you imitate. You don't call it that. You call it best practice adoption. Okay? But it is imitation. Okay? That's what you do. And then you focus on efficiency. In other words, productivity means getting more for less. Okay? So if I go to Vietnam, that works. That is a really good basis of success. If I go to Switzerland, that does not work. Okay? In Switzerland, I have to be on the lower left. I have to innovate, and productivity is defined as doing smarter things in smarter ways. Okay? So it's a completely different definition of these things. So if I talk to a Swiss company of the size of many of your companies, in other words, relatively middle-sized to small, they will tell me, every day I wake up and I say to myself, am I today producing anything that anybody else in the world could produce? If the answer is yes, I'm producing the wrong thing. Okay? Secondly, they say, there is only one company in this world who will start to take market share from me, and that is myself. I will cannibalize my products with new products before anybody else does. It's a completely different way of thinking. There's none of that sweat the asset until it dies stuff, okay? It's about constantly ensuring that you are there and that you sell on value for money because nobody else can offer you what you can, okay? That's why the machine tools you buy are Swiss or German, right? They come. Yeah, but generally speaking, yeah. You have the few English and you have a few Americans, but on the whole, and occasional Australian ones, but on the whole,
we sell Australian ones.
Yeah, good. That means they found something really smart to buy, which is really good. They are clever at that, so if they buy it, it must be really good. Huh? But also you will find they have a really interesting way of selling. We have one of these really large machine tools, subtractive ones that you work in titanium on. It stands in BAE Systems facilities in Edinburgh in South Australia. If you're going to go and buy that machine from them, it's very expensive. The first thing they will ask you is, prove to me that you know how to make money out of this. Otherwise, I ain't going to sell it to you. Okay? You prove to me that you know how to deploy this machine in a way that will make you more profitable. If you can't prove that, I'm not going to sell this one to you. When did you last say that to your customer? Right? They are very tough on that. So of course you still need to compete on cost, but that just becomes a table stake. There's nothing more than that. So you have to do all your productivity improvement. And by the way, to give you a rule of thumb, it's the 3 5s. You should have 5% investment in R&D every year. You should have 5% investment in training your employees every year to make them more productive. You should have 5% investment in renewing your capital equipment every year. And if you do that, you should achieve 5% productivity improvement as an organization every year. That's the average in Germanic Europe. 5% per year. That was a bit of rule of thumb. You of course then need to be very good at innovation, the cost focus comes first in that because innovation can be done by reducing cost. And you all know about lean. I'm not going to say a lot about lean. I'm only going to say that lean as a simple principle means do more of what you get paid for and less of what you don't get paid for. That's basically the essence of lean. Okay? Then you can break it down in what are the waste issues that you're doing that you don't get paid for and how can you reduce them and all this kind of stuff. But the principle is very simple. Do more of what you get paid for and less of what you don't get paid for. It's quite a useful way of looking at the world. Right? Now, if you do operate as a company here, there are 4 principal issues. you will have to start to move towards what has an academic term of being a hidden champion. It comes from a study by a guy called Simon in 1990, who found that there were a lot of these invisible companies that were varied in size. And normally they were above 250 employees, but they had less than 1 billion in turnover, so quite a large range. They normally operated in business-to-business market, not always. They were very invisible because their component went in somewhere where nobody saw it, and they were highly successful and very resilient. And they looked very much what characterized them. You have to servitize, in other words, you have to add services to your product, and you have to really be good at understanding what the increasing level of digitalization of the process of a manufacturing firm means, and you have to innovate, innovate, and innovate. Servitize, why do you need to add services? You need to add services because the opportunity to add value in the production phase of manufacturing is constantly decreasing, whereas the opportunity to add value on the pre- and post-production is increasing. And hence, to have a stable value-adding potential, you need to extend yourself onto those both sides. And that means going into services. But that means different skills, it means the number of different things, but that's what you need to do. You need to also look at what's happening to digitalization, where of course, digitalization is somewhat high in the pre, somewhat high in the post, and somewhat little in the middle, and we will see a dramatic shift where basically you will design digitally, you will test digitally, you will test manufacture digitally, you will do a file that you send off somewhere where there is physically manufactured, and then you will service it because it will communicate with you on a digital space in a predictive and preventive maintenance type environment with associated services around that. And you need to build around that, and that requires very high ability to integrate part of the key enabling technologies and part of ICT systems. And the key enabling technologies are things like sensors and Internet of Things and so on. You need to understand how you innovate, that you use many things. You use science and technology, absolutely, but you use design. Design is frequently misunderstood. Design is the creation of an artifact that enables me to ensure that you change your behavior. When you now have your new behavior, you feel that you're better off. And as a consequence of being better off, you make me, the supplier, better off. Example is when you got your iPhone. Okay? The iPhone forced you to change your behavior of using a mobile phone. You discovered you could customize, you could application, you could this, that, and the other. You are now much happier because this new product does your life better. As a consequence of being happy, you use more data ever used before, more application ever used before, and you love Apple ever more than you've done before. All of those things makes money for Apple. Okay? So you are better off, they are better off. So from a design perspective, the iPhone is an excellent product. From a technology engineering perspective, it's mediocre technology badly put together. Okay? But the learning from that is in the consumer space, design beats technology 7 days out of 7. Right? Then you can use it art that matters in luxury products and a few other things. It impacts your subjective view of reality. So standing waiting in a painted subway station as opposed to an unpainted one makes time perceivably go faster. So there's a couple of issues like that. And you can then also work with emotional experiences. So if I run a grocery store and want you to shop more than you intended to, I have to make sure that you have one emotion that is very clear. I want you to be hungry. Okay? And if you're not hungry, I make you hungry. And that's a very easy engineering solution because I have a bakery at the back and I have an air conditioning system I connect it to, and it smells of newly baked bread in the shop and you get hungry. And you play with all these type of issues. So it's about understanding these issues and how you put them together. So that's important. And then finally, you need to work on creating value for your customers, maximize that, and I'll say one word of that. And you need to get a smart business model that actually allows you to extract value. So creating value means I give you 3 types of value. I give you value that you get because you put my product to use. I give you value because other people appreciate and like that you have that product. And I give you value because you think that it entails certain things that you value, which is why you buy a computer with more features than you ever use. Okay? You feel good having them. So you give them all these type of issues and understand how they work, maximize that, and then extract that in monetary form. And you have a smart business model. The objective of which is to ensure that you make more profit out of your business than you get revenue from your primary offering. Ryanair sells tickets for £50 million a year, have a profit of £700 million. Okay? And it's understanding how you go around accessing other profit pools and ensuring that you turn costs in other models into revenues and stuff like that. So these are some of the issues that we're facing, and that was just a very quick overview. You can't do much more. I overstayed a little bit, but I'm very happy to take any questions you have and direct on any issue that you would like to cover more.